Chapter 1: A Peaceful Paradise. Bindi had always dreamed of owning a home with a private pool. After years of hard work and saving, she finally purchased a charming house in the Sunnyside Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood known for its well-manicured lawns and friendly community. The crowning jewel of her new home was the sparkling blue pool in the backyard, surrounded by lush landscaping and a privacy fence. For the first few months, life in Sunnyside Estates was everything Bindi had hoped for. She spent her weekends lounging by the pool, hosting small gatherings with friends, and enjoying the tranquility of her own private oasis. The neighbors were welcoming, and the HOAs seemed to run smoothly, keeping the community looking pristine. Little did Bindi know that her peaceful paradise was about to be disrupted by the arrival of a new neighbor who would turn her life upside down. Chapter 2: Enter Karen. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when Bindi first met Karen. The moving truck had just pulled away, leaving Karen standing in her driveway, surveying her new kingdom. Bindi, being the friendly neighbor she was, decided to introduce herself. As she approached, Bindi couldn't help but feel a twinge of insecurity. Karen looked like she had just stepped off the cover of a fashion magazine. Long, flowing blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and a figure that defied the laws of nature. She was dressed in designer workout gear that probably cost more than Bindi's monthly mortgage payment. "Hi there. I'm Bindi, your next-door neighbor. Welcome to Sunnyside Estates," Bindi said, extending her hand. Karen's eyes flickered over Bindi, a small smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "Karen," she replied, shaking Bindi's hand with a grip that was just a bit too firm. "I'm sure we'll be great friends." There was something in Karen's tone that made Bindi feel uneasy, but she brushed it off as new neighbor jitters. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask," Bindi offered. Karen's eyes lit up. "Actually, I was wondering if I could take a dip in your pool sometime. It looks simply divine, and it would be so nice to cool off after unpacking all these boxes." Bindi hesitated. She had always been protective of her pool, seeing it as her private sanctuary. "Oh, well, it's a private pool, you see. But there's a great community pool just down the street that all the neighbors use." Karen's smile faltered for just a moment before returning, even brighter than before. "Of course, I understand. Maybe another time." As Bindi walked back to her house, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made a terrible mistake. Chapter 3: The First Strike. A week after Karen moved in, Bindi received an official-looking letter in her mailbox. It was from the Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association, and to her surprise, it was signed by Karen as the new HOA president. The letter detailed a list of infractions that Bindi had allegedly committed, including excessive water usage, unsightly pool equipment, and failure to maintain proper chemical balance in a community water feature. Bindi was stunned. Her pool was meticulously maintained, and it certainly wasn't a community water feature. She immediately called the HOA office to clarify the situation. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a mistake," Bindi explained to the receptionist. "I received a letter about violations regarding my private pool." "Oh, there's no mistake," the receptionist chirped. "President Karen has implemented new guidelines for all water features in the community. She's very concerned about water conservation and community aesthetics." Bindi felt her blood pressure rising. "But it's my private pool. The HOA has no jurisdiction over it." "I'm afraid you'll have to take that up with President Karen," the receptionist replied. "She's very passionate about making Sunnyside Estates the best it can be." As Bindi hung up the phone, she realized that this was only the beginning of her troubles. Chapter 4: Escalation. Over the next few weeks, the pressure from Karen and the HOA intensified. Bindi received daily notices about alleged violations, each more ridiculous than the last. Excessive splashing noises, unapproved pool toy colors, and even failure to provide adequate sunbathing space for neighboring properties were among the absurd complaints. Bindi tried to reason with Karen, inviting her over to discuss the situation face to face. Karen arrived in a bikini that looked more appropriate for a fashion runway than a neighborly chat. "Karen, this has to stop," Bindi said firmly. "My pool is private property. The HOA has no right to dictate how I use it." Karen lounged in one of Bindi's pool chairs, looking completely at ease. "Oh, Bindi, you're being so selfish. Don't you want to be a good neighbor? A team player?" "Being a good neighbor doesn't mean giving up my privacy and property rights," Bindi retorted. Karen's eyes narrowed. "I'd be careful if I were you, Bindi. Things can get very uncomfortable for homeowners who don't cooperate with the HOA." As Karen sauntered away, Bindi couldn't shake the feeling that she had just been threatened. Chapter 5: The Community Pool Decree. Just when Bindi thought things couldn't get any worse, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting. The main item on the agenda? Re-evaluating community water resources. Bindi attended the meeting, along with most of the other homeowners in Sunnyside Estates. Karen stood at the front of the room, commanding attention in a form-fitting dress that had most of the male attendees struggling to maintain eye contact. "As your HOA president, it is my duty to ensure that our community is using its resources in the most efficient and equitable manner," Karen began. "That's why I'm proposing that all private pools in Sunnyside Estates be reclassified as community resources." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. Bindi stood up, her heart pounding. "You can't do that. Our pools are private property." Karen's smile was shark-like. "Actually, according to the HOA bylaws, the board has the authority to designate any feature visible from common areas as a community resource. It's for the greater good, Bindi. Don't you want to share your blessings with your neighbors?" Before Bindi could argue further, Karen called for a vote. To Bindi's horror, the motion passed, with many homeowners swayed by Karen's charisma and promises of increased property values. As the meeting adjourned, Bindi overheard two of her neighbors talking. "I can't believe we get to use Bindi's pool now. It's so much nicer than the community pool." Bindi felt sick to her stomach. She knew she had to fight back, but how? Chapter 6: Invasion of Privacy. The day after the HOA meeting, Bindi woke up to the sound of splashing and laughter coming from her backyard. She rushed to the window, only to find a group of neighbors she barely knew frolicking in her pool. Furious, Bindi stormed outside in her robe. "What do you think you're doing? This is private property." One of the neighbors, a middle-aged man with a prominent beer belly, grinned at her. "Not anymore, sweetheart. Didn't you hear? It's a community pool now. President Karen said we could use it anytime." Bindi was speechless. She watched in disbelief as more neighbors arrived, setting up chairs and coolers as if her backyard was a public park. Unable to bear the sight any longer, Bindi retreated inside and called the police. Surely, they would see reason and remove these trespassers from her property. When the police arrived, Bindi felt a surge of hope. But that hope was quickly dashed when she saw Karen sauntering up the driveway, looking like she was headed for a photo shoot rather than a confrontation with law enforcement. "Officers," Karen purred, her voice dripping with honey, "I'm so glad you're here. There seems to be some confusion about our new community policies." Bindi watched in disbelief as Karen worked her charm on the officers. She touched their arms, laughed at their jokes, and even managed to convince one of them to take a selfie with her. "You see," Karen explained, batting her eyelashes, "the HOA has designated this pool as a community resource. Poor Bindi here is just having trouble adjusting to the new rules." The officers, clearly smitten with Karen, turned to Bindi with sympathetic but firm expressions. "This seems to be a civil matter between you and your HOA. We can't intervene in community disputes like this." As the police left, Karen blew Bindi a kiss. "Better get used to sharing, neighbor. It's going to be a long, hot summer." Bindi slammed her door shut, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. She knew she needed help, and fast. Chapter 7, Legal Counsel. Realizing she was out of her depth, Bindi decided to seek professional help. She made an appointment with Sarah Thompson, a lawyer specializing in property rights and HOA disputes. Sarah's office was a stark contrast to the chaos of Bindi's home life. It was quiet, orderly, and exuded an air of competence that immediately put Bindi at ease. "So, let me get this straight," Sarah said, peering at Bindi over her glasses. "Your HOA president has unilaterally declared your private pool to be community property, and now your neighbors are using it without your permission?" Bindi nodded miserably. "Yes, and the police won't do anything about it. They seem to be under Karen's spell." Sarah's lips tightened into a thin line. "I've seen cases like this before. Some HOA boards think they have unlimited power, but that's simply not true. What they're doing is a clear violation of your property rights." For the first time in weeks, Bindi felt a glimmer of hope. "So you can help me?" "Absolutely," Sarah replied, her voice filled with determination. "We'll file an injunction to stop the HOA from enforcing this ridiculous community pool policy. Then, we'll sue for damages and a permanent ruling to protect your property rights." As Bindi left the office, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Finally, someone was on her side. Chapter 8, The Court Battle Begins. The day of the court hearing arrived, and Bindi felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. She and Sarah had prepared meticulously, gathering evidence of Karen's overreach and the HOA's abuse of power. As they entered the courtroom, Bindi's heart sank. Karen was already there, looking like she had just stepped off a runway in Milan. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, and she wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Bindi's car. The judge, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, called the court to order. "We're here today to hear the case of Bindi Patel versus Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association," he announced. "Ms. Thompson, please present your case." Sarah stood, her voice clear and confident. "Your Honor, this is a clear-cut case of HOA overreach and violation of property rights. My client, Ms. Patel, purchased her home with a private pool. The HOA, under the leadership of Karen Smith, has illegally declared this private property to be a community resource." As Sarah presented their evidence, including the original property deed, HOA bylaws, and testimonies from other homeowners, Bindi began to feel confident. The judge seemed to be nodding along, asking pointed questions that suggested he understood the gravity of the situation. But then it was Karen's turn to speak. As she approached the bench, Bindi noticed a change come over the judge. His stern expression softened, and he seemed to sit up straighter in his chair. "Your Honor," Karen began, her voice soft and melodious, "I'm just a simple woman trying to do what's best for our community. Sunnyside Estates has always been about sharing and caring for one another. Ms. Patel's refusal to share her pool is not only selfish but goes against the very spirit of our neighborhood." Bindi watched in horror as Karen worked her magic on the judge. She told heart-wrenching stories of children who couldn't afford pool passes, of elderly residents who needed water therapy, and of how Bindi's hoarding of her pool was tearing the community apart. By the time Karen finished her impassioned speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom except for Bindi and Sarah, who exchanged worried glances. The judge cleared his throat, visibly moved by Karen's performance. "This is clearly a complex issue that requires careful consideration. I'll need time to review all the evidence before making my decision. Court is adjourned until next week." As they left the courtroom, Bindi turned to Sarah. "What just happened? I thought we had a solid case." Sarah's expression was grim. "We do have a solid case. But never underestimate the power of a charismatic personality in the courtroom. We're not beaten yet, Bindi. We just need to regroup and come back stronger." Bindi nodded, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled in her stomach. She knew the real battle was just beginning. Chapter 9: The Verdict. The week leading up to the judge's decision was the longest of Bindi's life. She barely slept, spending her nights pacing around her house, watching helplessly as neighbors continued to use her pool at all hours. When the day finally arrived, the courtroom was packed. It seemed like the entire neighborhood had turned out to hear the verdict. Bindi sat next to Sarah, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The judge entered, his face unreadable. After careful consideration of all the evidence presented, I have reached a decision in the case of Patel vs. Sunnyside Estates HOA. Bindi held her breath. While I sympathize with Ms. Patel's desire for privacy, I find that the HOA acted within its rights to designate her pool as a community resource. The greater good of the community must take precedence over individual desires. Therefore, I rule in favor of the defendant, Sunnyside Estates HOA. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Bindi sat in stunned silence, unable to believe what she had just heard. She turned to Sarah, who looked equally shocked. "This can't be happening," Bindi whispered. "How could he rule against us when the law is so clearly on our side?" Sarah shook her head, her expression grim. "I'm sorry, Bindi. Sometimes the law isn't enough. But this isn't over. We can appeal." As they gathered their things to leave, Bindi caught sight of Karen, who was being congratulated by a group of neighbors. Their eyes met, and Karen's lips curled into a triumphant smirk. In that moment, Bindi knew she couldn't give up. She had to find a way to reclaim her home and her peace of mind, no matter what it took. Chapter 10: The Resistance Begins. In the days following the court decision, Bindi's emotions oscillated between despair and fury. She couldn't bear to look out her windows, knowing that at any moment, she might see strangers splashing around in what was once her private sanctuary. The constant sound of laughter and splashing from her backyard felt like a personal affront, a constant reminder of her defeat. But as the initial shock wore off, Bindi's sadness crystallized into steely determination. She realized that if she was going to win this fight, she needed to change her tactics. This wasn't just about her pool anymore, it was about standing up to injustice and protecting everyone's property rights. Her first step was to rally support among her fellow homeowners. While many had initially been swayed by Karen's charm and promises, the reality of having their own properties potentially at risk was starting to sink in. Bindi knew she had to capitalize on this growing unease. She started small, having quiet conversations with neighbors she trusted. She shared her fears about what this precedent could mean for everyone in Sunnyside Estates. To her surprise, many were receptive, expressing their own concerns about the HOA's overreach. Encouraged by these initial conversations, Bindi decided to take a bolder step. She organized a secret meeting at a local coffee shop, carefully inviting homeowners who seemed sympathetic to her cause. She chose a time when Karen usually had her weekly spa appointment, minimizing the risk of being discovered. On the day of the meeting, Bindi arrived early, her stomach in knots. Would anyone show up? Had she misjudged the community sentiment? But as the appointed time approached, people began to trickle in. To her amazement and relief, the turnout was impressive. By the time she stood to address the group, the small coffee shop was packed. "Thank you all for coming," Bindi began, her voice initially shaky but growing stronger with each word. "I know many of you have been enjoying my pool, but I need you to understand the bigger picture. If the HOA can take away my property rights, they can take away yours too. Today it's my pool, but tomorrow it could be your garage, your garden, or even your spare bedroom." A murmur of concern rippled through the group. One of her neighbors, Tom, a usually quiet retiree, spoke up. "You right, Bindi. I didn't think about it that way. What Karen and the HOA are doing, it's not right. What can we do to help?" Bindi felt a surge of hope at Tom's words. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. We need to band together and take back control of the HOA, she said, her voice filled with newfound confidence. Karen may have charmed her way into the presidency, but we can vote her out. We can change the bylaws to prevent this kind of overreach from happening again. The group spent the next 2 hours brainstorming strategies. They formed committees to research HOA laws, to canvass the neighborhood for more support, and to plan for the next HOA election. As the meeting wound down, Bindi felt a sense of camaraderie and purpose that had been missing since this ordeal began. As everyone was leaving, Sarah, a young mother who lived down the street, approached Bindi. I have to admit, I was one of the people using your pool, she said, looking ashamed. I didn't realize how wrong it was. I'm so sorry, Bindi. Count me in for whatever you need to fix this. Bindi squeezed Sarah's hand, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Thank you, Sarah. We're all in this together now. As Bindi walked home that evening, she felt a renewed sense of hope. The path ahead would be challenging, but she wasn't walking it alone anymore. The resistance had begun, and Bindi was ready to fight for her home, her privacy, and the rights of every homeowner in Sunnyside Estates. Little did she know, Karen had eyes and ears everywhere, and the battle was about to escalate in ways Bindi couldn't have imagined. Chapter 11, Karen Strikes Back. The day after the secret meeting, Bindi woke up feeling optimistic for the first time in weeks. She had allies now, a plan of action, and a renewed sense of purpose. As she made her morning coffee, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could enjoy her pool in peace once again. But her newfound hope was short-lived. As she stepped outside to collect her mail, she was met with a sight that made her blood run cold. Her entire front yard was covered in bright yellow violation notices, each one detailing a different infraction of HOA rules. Unapproved lawn ornaments. Excessive grass length. Unauthorized plant species. Improper mailbox maintenance. The list went on, each violation more absurd than the last. Bindi's hands shook as she gathered the notices, aware of her neighbors peeking out their windows at the spectacle. Just as she was about to retreat inside, she heard the unmistakable click of high heels on the sidewalk. Karen was approaching, a clipboard in hand and a triumphant smirk on her face. "Oh, Bindi," Karen called out, her voice dripping with false concern. "I see you've received your violation notices. I'm afraid we've had to levy quite a few fines. It seems you've been so preoccupied with other matters that you've let your property maintenance slip." Bindi struggled to keep her composure. "This is ridiculous, Karen. These aren't real violations, and you know it." Karen's smile widened. "The HOA board seems to think they are. In fact, given the extent of the violations, we may need to consider more severe measures. Liens, perhaps? Or maybe even foreclosure?" Bindi felt the blood drain from her face. "You can't do that. You won't get away with this." Karen leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I know all about your little meeting, Bindi. Did you really think you could plot against me without me finding out? This is just a taste of what I can do. Back off now, or things will get much, much worse." As Karen sauntered away, Bindi stood rooted to the spot, her mind reeling. How had Karen found out about the meeting? And more importantly, what was she going to do now? With shaking hands, Bindi pulled out her phone and called Sarah Thompson, her lawyer. As the phone rang, she surveyed the sea of yellow notices covering her lawn. She had underestimated Karen once before, she wouldn't make that mistake again. This wasn't just about the pool anymore. This was war, and Bindi was determined to win, no matter what it took. Chapter 12, The Counterattack. Bindi spent the next few days in a flurry of activity. She met with Sarah Thompson, her lawyer, to discuss the legality of Karen's latest move. They pored over HOA bylaws, city ordinances, and state laws, looking for any ammunition they could use against Karen's tyrannical reign. "These violations are completely fabricated," Sarah said, shaking her head as she examined the notices. "We can definitely fight this in court. But Bindi, you need to be prepared. Karen's not going to back down easily." Bindi nodded, a determined glint in her eye. "I know. But neither am I." While Sarah worked on the legal angle, Bindi focused on rallying her neighbors. She called an emergency meeting of her newly formed resistance group, this time choosing a location outside of Sunnyside Estates to avoid Karen's spies. The group had grown since their last meeting. Word had spread about Karen's latest attack on Bindi, and many who had been on the fence before were now firmly on Bindi's side. "We need to act fast," Bindi told the assembled group. "Karen's not just coming after me anymore. She's shown she's willing to abuse her power to target anyone who opposes her." Tom, the retiree who had spoken up at the last meeting, raised his hand. "I've been doing some digging," he said. "Turns out, Karen's been using HOA funds for personal expenses. Spa treatments, designer clothes, even a luxury vacation, all billed to the HOA account." A gasp went through the room. This was exactly the kind of evidence they needed. "Great work, Tom," Bindi said, feeling a surge of hope. "We can use this. But we need to be smart about how we proceed. Karen's got the judge wrapped around her finger, and she's got eyes and ears all over the neighborhood." The group spent the next few hours devising a plan. They would gather more evidence of Karen's misdeeds, document every instance of HOA overreach, and prepare for a special election to remove Karen from her position. As the meeting was wrapping up, Sarah, the young mother who had apologized to Bindi earlier, spoke up. "I have an idea," she said hesitantly. "It's a bit unconventional, but it might just work." All eyes turned to Sarah as she outlined her plan. As Bindi listened, a slow smile spread across her face. It was risky, perhaps even a little devious, but it just might be crazy enough to work. As the group dispersed, energized and hopeful, Bindi felt a renewed sense of purpose. Karen may have won the last round, but the game was far from over. Little did Karen know, her reign of terror was about to face its biggest challenge yet. The resistance was no longer just fighting back, they were about to turn the tables on Sunnyside Estates' supermodel tyrant. Chapter 13, Justice Served. Armed with the damning evidence from their sting operation, Bindi and her team faced a moral dilemma. They knew they had the power to bring Karen down, but they were hesitant about the methods they had used to obtain the information. After a long night of debate, they decided that the greater good of the community outweighed their concerns. They couldn't allow Karen to continue abusing her power and manipulating their neighbors. The next morning, Bindi called an emergency HOA meeting. As residents filed into the community center, there was a palpable tension in the air. Karen strutted in last, looking confident and unaware of what was about to unfold. "Thank you all for coming," Bindi began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "We're here today because we have evidence of serious misconduct by our HOA president, Karen." Karen scoffed, but before she could interject, Bindi nodded to Mike, who started playing the video on a large screen. The room fell silent as Karen's own words filled the air, detailing her misuse of HOA funds and her manipulation of residents and even the judge. As the video ended, Karen's face had turned pale. She stood up, her voice shrill. "This is a setup. You can't use this." But the damage was done. The residents of Sunnyside Estates had seen and heard enough. One by one, they stood up, voicing their outrage and demanding Karen's immediate resignation. Realizing she was cornered, Karen made a desperate attempt to flee, but Tom and a few other neighbors blocked her path. "I think the police might be interested in hearing about your creative accounting, Karen," Tom said firmly. In the end, Karen was removed from her position as HOA president and faced legal consequences for her actions. The judge who had ruled in her favor was investigated for bias and eventually recused himself from any future HOA cases. Bindi's pool was officially declared her private property once again, and the HOA bylaws were rewritten to prevent any similar overreach in the future. The community came together to help Bindi repair the damage done to her yard and pool area during Karen's reign of terror. As Bindi floated peacefully in her pool a few weeks later, she reflected on the ordeal they had all been through. It had been a difficult and sometimes ugly battle, but in the end, justice had prevailed. The experience had brought the community closer together, teaching them the importance of standing up against injustice and the power of collective action. Sunnyside Estates was now truly living up to its name, with neighbors looking out for each other and a new sense of harmony prevailing. As the sun set on another beautiful day, Bindi smiled to herself. Her pool was more than just a private oasis now, it was a symbol of their community's resilience and the triumph of right over wrong.